What's going on, guys? This is Rob, and mutants have existed this entire time in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and Marvel basically told us they did. Now, part of this theory is not new, and has actually really been circulating around for a long time, but part of it is, and I wanna know your all's thoughts on this. Okay, so let's start off with the part that you guys do know, and have a little bit of a refresher course when it comes to Wanda, the Scarlet Witch. So a popular theory out there right now is that Wanda is gonna do like a reverse House of M. That Wanda is basically, instead of taking away 98% of the mutant population's powers, she's actually gonna give powers to people and then basically create mutants that way, which I'm not entirely sure I agree with. But focusing on this sort of quick little origin here, the first question you really gotta ask is like, how did Wanda get her powers? And the answer is, we're never given an answer. All we're really told here is that when Wanda was really young, that a Stark bomb fell through her house, killed her parents, and that her powers essentially kept the bomb from going off, right? They manifested when she was a little kid. Now, fast forward to the events of her being in Sokovia and effectively being like a freedom fighter / protester. Now, as we know from the post-credit scene with Captain America, the Winter Soldier? I don't remember which one it was, but basically like Baron von Strucker was like, it's an age of miracles, you know, it's an age of mutants. We all kind of knew what he was saying, even though Marvel couldn't officially say it. We basically saw that Wanda's powers were essentially activated alongside Pietro's powers by way of the Mind Stone. Following that, of course, Wanda goes on to basically become an ally of Ultron and then basically Turncoat, and then like the rest is history in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, right? You guys know all that kind of stuff. Now, here's the kicker and the caveat to this. Wanda's been a mutant this whole time. I think that's gonna be the big thing. So when it comes to Doctor Strange 2, right, and this is something that we keep on talking about, right? When it comes to Doctor Strange 2, the big thing is Xavier's like, let's tell him the truth. I think the truth of what Xavier's going to tell Doctor Strange is Wanda is not just some arbitrary person who can manipulate magic. Wanda's a mutant. She's a mutant, and there's a lot more of her. Like, there's a lot more people like her than simply just her in your universe. You just don't know about them. We'll talk about that a little bit here in a second, because post-credit scene, I have a really good idea for a post-credit scene. So here's a question I would ask you. What's the big difference between someone like Agatha Harkness or someone like Doctor Strange and Wanda, right? What sets her apart from them? The big difference here is they had to learn how to use magic. That the origin of Agatha Harkness, at least as it was given to us in WandaVision, is she was part of a witch's coven. And then she basically started delving into what was essentially black magic, and then of course was gonna be killed by her coven, and then she basically reversed the spell and then killed her coven instead, including her mom, and then just went forward from there. But she had to learn how to use her powers. She wasn't born with the ability to use magic. Doctor Strange was the exact same way. I mean, we all literally watched that movie. The guy was a surgeon who didn't even believe that magic existed, and then ultimately became the Sorcerer Supreme. Wanda was not that way. There's nothing to indicate that Wanda was part of like a witch's coven and was whisked away to safety to the land of Sokovia, war-torn and everything, where she was raised alongside her brother and then her parents died in a bombing, right? There's nothing to indicate that that's the case. More so than that, if we tie in this idea that what Wanda has here is an X gene, it explains a lot. It explains, one, where her powers came from in the first place, two, how she's so adept at using them despite having no formal training, because that's one thing to remember. Wanda has no formal training in magic. There's never been any reference in the Marvel Cinematic Universe where Doctor Strange has taken Wanda under his wing and taught her how to use her powers. That's never been the case, but she is prodigious at being able to use those abilities, even when she was using them in somewhat of a minor level. By the time she showed up in Age of Ultron and was like using her powers against the Avengers, she knew what she was doing. Right, so seemingly she'd been doing it for a little while. She basically seemed to be self-taught. This also explains why Wanda is so incredibly powerful. So here's the thing, when it comes to magic in Marvel Comics, I know the Marvel Cinematic Universe plays by its own rules and Wanda uses chaos magic, but that's a similarity with the comics. So there's all kinds of magical energy that exists out there in Marvel Comics. Say for example, somebody like Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange, of course, as you guys know, does not have any powers in and of himself. He borrows powers from other magical beings. Like 80% of his magical power comes from a group called the Vishanti, a trinity of just super powerful magical beings. But the things that Doctor Strange can do are limited to the abilities of the people he borrows magic from. So let's say, for example, that the Vishanti did not have the ability to teleport, right? That's something they just simply couldn't do. I mean, they can, but like, let's say they weren't able to do that. Doctor Strange can draw on the power of the Vishanti, but he can't teleport. He can only really do what they can do. Now, because that's not an ability the Vishanti have, Doctor Strange can like borrow that ability from other people. And so that's why you see, at least in the comics and the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Doctor Strange invoking the spells of different people, because different magical beings can do stuff that other magical beings simply just can't do. A lot of them are very unique. So like the Crimson Bands of Sidorak. Sidorak is the only one who can do that, right? It's not the Crimson Bands of Dormammu, right? The Crimson Bands of Zom, which, by the way, man, I really hope they introduce Zom in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Let me tell you something, man. In the hierarchy of like evil magical beings or just magical beings in general, there's Zom, then there's everybody else. This guy is just on a whole different level, right? Like, the guy was so powerful, the living tribunal, the living embodiment of the multiverse had to step in to stop this guy. Like Eternity, the living embodiment of the universe, could not defeat him. He's just that powerful. It's ridiculous how OP Zom is. But nonetheless, back on track. Wanda having an X gene that allows her to manipulate magic would explain all this. And the reason for that is because if it is an inherent ability of hers, by virtue of her mutant power, to manipulate magical energy, then unlike Doctor Strange, where the doors of chaos magic are essentially closed to him, they're not closed to Wanda. No doors are closed to her, right? There is no source of ambient magical energy that she cannot manipulate. Chaos energy is the most powerful form of magical energy. You can do anything with chaos energy, right? You can alter reality, you can turn a coffee cup into a pencil, you can read people's minds, control people's minds. If you can imagine it, it can be done. The price you pay for using chaos magic is you basically begin to bind yourself to Chthon, and then ultimately you will be irrevocably stuck to him, right? So essentially, you can make yourself into a vector, right? Now with Wanda, it's a little bit different. She's kind of forced down that road because the nature of her being able to manipulate chaos magic in the comics is tied directly to the fact that her powers are actually from Chthon himself. In the Marvel Cinematic Universe, that doesn't seem to be the case. Now here's the reason why I say there's so much credence to this idea. So one of the best kept secrets of the Marvel Cinematic Universe that almost nobody knows about is they release comics. People don't really know that, right? People aren't aware of the fact that like the Marvel Cinematic Universe releases what are called Infinity Comics. Basically, they're digital only comics. But these are basically kind of tie-ins or things that happen in between different events. So like the Infinity comic for the prelude to Age of Ultron, 60% of that's basically the post-credit scene where Baron Von Strucker's like, it's an Age of Miracles and all that kind of crap. But there is a point in that story, as well as in the books of Wakanda that was released to tie into the Marvel Cinematic Universe, where you learn the reason why Hydra had set up shop in Sokovia by grabbing people and bringing them in and using the Mind Stone on them is because they had detected genetic abnormalities among some of the citizens in Sokovia. They didn't know what those abnormalities were. They didn't know what those abnormalities meant. All they knew is that they were simply just there. And so using the Mind Stone on the volunteers, basically those individuals that they had spoken to who had genetic abnormalities, who in turn agreed to partake in those experiments in an effort to gain enough power to basically free their country, that seemingly everybody except for Wanda and Pietro died. Now that's an important distinction there, because not everybody who had some kind of genetic abnormality sided with Hydra and actually went in and performed or was inducted in those experiments. Not all those people did. So what that means is that if those genetic abnormalities are basically people with mutant genes, they're out there, right? There are some who are just in Sokovia, right? Or maybe left Sokovia and are now traveling throughout the rest of the world. But basically, the Marvel Cinematic Universe told us that. This is doubly important when you look at Wanda, because one thing to understand is that mutant genes only activate under one of three circumstances. Like 90 to 95% is just puberty, right? So you're some 13-year-old boy and you start getting hair in funny places, start thinking about girls, and then you learn you can teleport, right? So like something along those lines. The remaining 5 to 10% only happen under one of two circumstances. The first is that those powers are artificially activated, and that's what happened to Wolverine in the Ultimate Universe. When Canada was trying to create super soldiers, they discovered Wolverine had some kind of a gene they didn't recognize. When they activated it, he developed a healing factor. The other scenario is moments of high duress. Now, Marvel never really explains or reconciles that, right? There have been instances where mutants, like kids, have been confronted with just like overwhelmingly stressful situations and their powers never manifest. Other times it does, right? There have been times when like two mutants will be facing some overwhelming situation and only one of their powers will manifest. So it's not an absolute thing, but moments of high duress is when mutant powers can also activate. What is a greater moment of high duress than a bomb falling in your house, killing your parents, and you being too young to genuinely understand what's going on, right? Running purely on your subconscious and your instincts, right? Like, that's a recipe for a mutant power to activate. So that's what I think is gonna happen. Like the scene when literally Xavier is talking to Doctor Strange, when he says like, let's tell him the truth, I think that's gonna be the first time, right? That's gonna be the bomb. That's gonna be like just the hammer hitting, where Xavier's just like, Wanda's a mutant. She's not some random person who's a witch that can manipulate magical energy. She is a mutant. M-U-T-A-N-T, Stephen Strange. I think that's basically what's gonna happen. And that's gonna be huge. Now, I'm gonna blow your minds for a second, right? Post-credit scene time. So imagine over the course of this movie, at some point after Doctor Strange meets with the Illuminati, probably talking to Baron Mordo, when he's like, so is there like a variant of everybody across the multiverse? And Baron Mordo's like, yeah, man, there's an alternate reality where you basically had kids with Christine Palmer and you lived happily ever after. And there's an alternate reality where you basically killed the Ancient One and then became Sorcerer Supreme, killed everybody else around the world who could challenge you, and then subjugated Earth. Which is kind of a story that I want to see, if I'm being honest with you guys. But he's like, yeah, I mean, there are variants of us, right? The Illuminati all across the multiverse, right? We exist everywhere. And so based on that, right, that's when your mind starts going, and it's like, did they just tell us there's a variant of Charles Xavier in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Cut to the post-credit scene, right? So like you get the sound, like you know the sound you hear when like Doctor Strange is landing, like the rippling cloak sound. You get that sound, and like literally he just lands and he just starts walking forward, and he goes through these gates. And as he's walking, the camera pans away from him and to the right, and there's a sign that says Xavier School for Gifted Youngsters. If I want to blow your minds even more, remember that theory we had about Vision knowing about mutants? I think that'd be a great way to segue. Those of you guys who aren't really familiar with that, there was this theory that we had something like 6 months ago, where basically when Vision got the Mind Stone, he learned that mutants were real. He learned that Xavier had actually been hiding the existence of mutants from everybody across the world. And Vision went to Xavier and was like, okay, so like, talk. Because there's literally millions of people walking around who all have powers and can do extraordinary things, and no one seems to know. And it's all because of you. So like, what's going on here, Pops? And Xavier's just like, if the world learned we existed, they would kill us. Like they would hunt us down. They would hate us, right? People attack what they don't understand. Just look at everything, Vision, right? Like literally Ultron became self-aware, learned about the internet, and after 5 minutes decided humanity didn't need to exist. You guys have seen that meme, right? Like, come on, Vision. You have to understand. And ultimately, you know, for real and for true, being serious here, Vision actually understands what Xavier is saying. And it's like, I agree with you. If the world learned that you guys existed, they would hunt you down, right? Or they would imprison you, or they would experiment on you, or something along those lines. The world can't know you exist. And so ultimately Vision leaves, and we never learn about mutants. Because what is the Marvel Cinematic Universe if not us basically observing the interpersonal relationships and conflicts between various characters? It's not like we're a person in that room. They're not breaking the fourth wall and addressing us as the audience. That's what Deadpool does. That's his thing. So we're just observing them. And if Vision made a promise to Xavier that he would never ever tell anybody about the X-Men or mutants existing in the MCU, he would never bring it up, because he told Xavier he wouldn't. He wouldn't tell Tony Stark or Bruce Banner or any of those guys. No one would know. He'd basically be the one that kept the secret. The funny thing about this though is that I'm pretty sure Nick Fury knows too. But having said that, guys, we're gonna bring this video to an end. Let me know what you guys think about this theory down in the comments section. Thank you all for watching, and I will catch you all later. Peace.